So really thrilled to introduce Chad Frischmann to you, a coalition builder and systems strategist. He's the lead researcher and principal architect of the methodology and methods behind Project Drawdown. Any of you have heard of Project Drawdown before? It's brilliant stuff, and it really is giving people a lot of hope and fresh ideas of looking at climate change in lots of different ways. So please, let's welcome Chad.
Everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you to the Volo Foundation and UCF. Pleasure to be here. So I'd like to introduce you to a word you may never have heard before, but you ought to know. Drawdown. Drawdown. Drawdown is a new way of thinking about and acting on global warming. It's a goal for a future that we want. A future where reversing global warming is possible. Drawdown is that point in time when atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases begin to decline on a year-to-year basis. More simply, it's that point when we take out more than we put into Earth's atmosphere. Now, we're all concerned about climate change, and we should be. But climate change is really the expression of the problem. It's the feedback of the planet telling us what's going on. The system is working. The problem is global warming, provoked by the increasing concentrations of greenhouse gases caused by human activity. So how do we solve the problem? How do we begin the process of reversing global warming? The only way we know how is to draw down, to avoid putting greenhouse gases up and to pull down what's already there. Now I know, given the current situation, it sounds impossible. But humanity already knows what to do. There are real, workable technologies and practices to achieve drawdown, and it's already happening. We need to accelerate that implementation and to change the discourse from one of confusion and fear, which only leads to apathy, to one of understanding, possibility, and therefore opportunity. I work for an organization called Project Drawdown. And over the last 4 years, together with a large group of researchers and writers from all over the world, we've mapped, measured, and detailed 100 solutions to reversing global warming. 80 already exist, and when taken together, those 80 can achieve drawdown in time. They can begin the process of reversing global warming. 20 are coming attractions, solutions on the pipeline, and when they come online, can accelerate our progress. These solutions are viable, scalable, and financially feasible. So what's keeping us from implementing the solutions that we need at the scale that we need? We've done a fantastic job around the science behind the problem and the effect. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, is one of the greatest scientific endeavors in human history in terms of the sheer number of scientists and data that have brought together. Now, it has been conservative, and it is consensus-based, but it is absolutely foundational. And there are many other great organizations doing work on the problem and the effect, global warming and climate change. But the science is often daunting, complex, too distant for most people to act upon. And it's predicated on the notion of limiting or stabilizing certain parts per million of particulate matter in the atmosphere, or a certain temperature rise, whether that's 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees, by 2100, under an existential threat to the species and to the planet. The challenge here is that the human species hasn't really evolved to think about 100-year timescales and existential threats to the species. The very best planners amongst us can just about think and plan 3 to 5 years into the future within their own immediate communities. And with technology today, 3 to 6 months is a challenge for many of us. So while these are important targets, we need to go beyond stabilization and start to envision that future that we want to achieve. And that future is drawdown, to reverse global warming. Now, Project Drawdown is not only a communications organization, but a living research program that rests on the foundation of data-driven, credible information on solutions to reverse global warming. And it's a coalition of researchers, policymakers, business leaders, and implementers from all over the world that are researching, assembling, modeling, and amplifying the best available information on solutions to reversing global warming. Over the past 3 years, Project Drawdown has brought over 65 researchers from around the world with a very diverse set of backgrounds. And in fact, we just launched our 5th cohort last week of a new round of fellows. Nearly 50% have PhDs, all have 1 or more master's degree, and they come from many different backgrounds. We're not just data junkies and climate wonks. Now, don't get me wrong, we love data, and we are a little bit wonky, but we come from a diversity of backgrounds, from science, of course, but also business and law, human rights, international development, forestry, agriculture, engineering, architecture. It's that diversity of perspectives that we need to bring to the table to address the solutions to a systemic problem. We do also, by the way, have climate scientists and data scientists. But to make this a truly collaborative research model, we have to bring all of these perspectives to bear on the solutions. And alongside these researchers, we have a coalition of over 130 advisors, and counting every day. These are IPCC lead authors, advocates, thought leaders, business leaders, policymakers from all over the world. And these advisors are actively engaged, providing expert review for our research and communication efforts. And they provide a voice and become ambassadors to draw down out to the world. So together, this is a living research collaborative that brings together over 200 individuals and organizations. So what are we all doing together? Well, Project Drawdown set the ambitious task of determining whether drawdown was not only possible, but financially feasible. And while there exist many global systems models out there, few had evaluated different mitigation pathways from a bottom-up, solutions-oriented approach using an agency perspective. Now, agency we refer to as decision makers at all scales. So, fewer still, I should say, set out to be a comprehensive analysis that included not only energy, but land use and human rights. So we set out to build a model from the ground up that would be not only data-driven and rigorous, but useful and functional. We set out to build a model that would not require a PhD and 10 years of modeling experience to open the file. So this is meant to be functional for all decision makers at all scales. And what we evaluate in terms of solutions are solutions to one of 3 things. Replace existing fossil fuel-based energy generation with clean, renewable alternatives. Reduce consumption through technological efficiency and behavior change. And to biosequester carbon in plants' biomass and soil organic carbon through a process we all learn about in grade school, the magic of photosynthesis. It's through a combination of these 3 mechanisms that drawdown becomes possible. And so in order to achieve this, we developed 3 core models that evaluate solutions that do one or more of those 3 mechanisms. A reduction and replacement model that evaluates global markets of functional demand. A land use model that looks at different agroecological zones and thermal moisture regimes that creates boundaries and constrains the adoption of different land practices within based on biophysical characteristics. And a food systems model that evaluates global consumption patterns on a country-by-country basis, looking at over 13 different commodity types. So I'm going to quickly go through this. So first off, what we do is we collect a lot of data from around the world. And we use statistical analysis to create ranges that allow us to make reasonable choices for every input that's used. And we have a conservative bias, which underlies the entire project. All this data on solutions is entered into our models ambitiously, but plausibly projected into the future, and compared against what we would have to do anyway. So when we're evaluating onshore wind turbines, for example, we are looking at the difference between the electricity generated from wind farms to what would have to be produced anyway from coal or gas-fired plants. And we calculate all the costs associated with building and operating the plants and all the emissions produced, direct and indirect emissions. And the same process is used to evaluate recycling versus landfilling, regenerative versus industrial agriculture, protecting versus cutting down our forests. And we evaluate 3 different types of ambitious scenarios: the plausible scenario, a drawdown scenario, and an optimum scenario. And we compare that against a reference case, which is a conservative adoption of solutions, but it basically is a case where we just don't do that much. We're not really implementing solutions over the next 30 years. And we compare them and we take the difference, and that difference produces results. Now, the plausible scenario is a scenario that roughly aligns to the 2-degree scenario for the IEA, for example, or a 450 parts per million from the IPCC. The drawdown is even more ambitious. It optimizes our models to achieve drawdown, that point when we start to decline in concentrations by 2050. And the optimum scenario, I like to call that the fairy tale scenario, which we really should be going for, right? And that's when we actually replace all the conventional high-emitting technologies with these solutions by 2050. So what we also have to do is once we put these solutions into our models, compare these different scenarios, we have to integrate them in order to avoid double counting, ensure we account for some system interactions, and to think about stock and flow issues as a system, because these are not solutions that operate in isolation, right? So these are integrated within and across systems, and then the results are added up to see if we actually achieve drawdown. And I'm just going to go through some very quickly, so just take a quick look at this. This is just a brief schematic of the building sector, for example. And what's important to see here is how the interactions around things like population, the grid electricity, fuel emissions, space heating and cooling, all factor into different types of systems within building energy use, and then the outputs of that actually can interconnect with other sectors. This is the waste solutions. This is another good example where the amount of municipal solid organic waste is determined by how much food we're producing and how much waste is actually accounted for. As it gets into our system, it then feeds into other solutions, right? So we have to think about this and what are the constraining factors as the stock and flow goes through the system. This is just a quick schematic of our land use system. And we can see the interactions of different land types, different agroecological zones, and the solutions within those zones that can be implemented and how they connect to other sectors like waste or renewable energy or the food system. So all of those results, once we've integrated them within and across systems, produce these results. Now, this is just a snapshot of the top 20 solutions that have resulted from our analysis. Now, I'll go into some details, but just take a quick few seconds to look over this list. It's eclectic, I know, from onshore wind turbines to educating girls, from plant-rich diets to rooftop solar technology. So let's just break it down real quick. To the right of the slide, you'll see figures in gigatons. That's 1 billion tons. That represents the total equivalent carbon dioxide reduced from the atmosphere when the solution is implemented globally over a 30-year period. Now, the first thing to notice here is when we typically think about climate solutions, we often think about electricity, right? We think, well, renewable energy is the most important set of solutions, and they're incredibly important. But note, only 5 of the top 20 solutions to reversing global warming relate to electricity. What surprised us, honestly, was that 8 of the top 20 relate to the food system. Now, the impact of the food system may come as a surprise to many people. But what these results show is that the decisions we make about the food we produce, purchase, and consume are perhaps the most important contributions every individual could make to reversing global warming. And here's something surprising. If we look at the food system as a whole, and we implement production solutions like regenerative agriculture, silvopasture, we adopt a plant-rich diet, the number 4 solution, and we reduce our food waste, the number 3 solution. Our research shows we would produce enough food on current farmland to feed the world's growing population a healthy, nutrient-rich diet now until 2050 and beyond. What that means...
I'm the grim reaper of timekeepers.
Oh, are we done with 15?
15's done, but you're going to join a panel in moments.
Okay.
You can wrap up the thought, and I'll give you... And we'll give
Okay.
You the panelists.
Great. That was... that was right at the wrong time. Yes. The point is that we don't have to cut down forests in order to produce food. All right? And what that means is that the solutions to reversing global warming are the same solutions to food insecurity. I'll quickly go through this list again. Land management is also incredibly important. This is how drawdown happens on a year-to-year basis. Together, 12 of the top 20 solutions relate to how and why we use land. And that really fundamentally shifts traditional thinking on climate solutions. And we'll skip refrigeration, which is really interesting, but we'll talk about that later. Drawdown is possible by 2050. It is possible, but we need all 80 solutions to get there. There's no such thing as a small solution. There's no silver bullet, no subset of solutions that are going to get there. We need all 80. Here's the great thing about this. When we implement these solutions as a whole, all 80 solutions together, what we do is shift the way we do business from a system that is inherently exploitative and extractive to a new normal that is by nature regenerative and restorative. This is the future that we want. All right? We need to rethink our global goals to move beyond stabilization, beyond sustainability, towards regeneration, and along the way reverse global warming. That I can cut now. Thank you.